What's up, guys? We are back with another week in our series, God is King, I Am a Disciple. So if you remember last week, we looked at the life of Daniel as an example of what it looks like to pursue holiness. And this week, we're going to pick back up with Daniel and his friends. We're going to be in Daniel 3 as we look at them as an example of our next big truth, which is that Jesus followers live for the one King. Jesus followers live for the one King. So just a little bit of context, some reminder. If you remember last week, we talked about Daniel and the boys. They've been taken captive from their home. They've been taken to Babylon, where they've been inserted into a new culture, a new language, given new things to eat and to drink. But through all of that, they were resolved to be obedient to the commands of the Lord. And so in Daniel 2, we see that Daniel and the boys have been shown great favor from the Lord. As they have continued to pursue holiness, and God has given them what they need to be in the good graces of King Nebuchadnezzar, this prideful, sinful king. And at the end of Daniel 2, all of them, Daniel and the boys, they've been promoted into these positions of authority within Babylon. And so that gets us to Daniel 3, which is where we'll be for this week. And so at the beginning of this chapter, we see again this king, Nebuchadnezzar, and he has set up a golden statue of himself. And he has declared that everyone within earshot, basically, of this entire kingdom is going to worship this statue. And so he says, anyone, all peoples and nations and languages who hears the music will bow down and they will worship this golden statue of the king. And if they don't, they will be thrown into a fiery furnace to their deaths. And so that's where we find the boys, Daniel's friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And so there are some people who don't like Daniel and the boys. Maybe they're jealous that they have been promoted into these positions of authority. We don't know. But they go to the king and they say, hey, you know those boys who you promoted to be over all of the affairs of Babylon? Well, they're not going to do this. They don't even pay attention to you, oh great king. They'll never bow down and worship you. They don't worship our same gods. They are going to disobey this order. They won't worship this image that you have set up. And so the king is angry. He calls the boys to him and he basically gives them one last chance. He says, is it true? When you will hear this music, you will bow down and you will worship this statue of me, or I will have you killed, thrown into the furnace. And here is what we see. What we see happens is in our Bible verses for this week. It's in Daniel chapter 3, 16 through 18. And we see Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If this be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. But if not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. So that's kind of setting the stage for this week. We have three big ideas. This week I'm not really going to teach through them, but I am going to give them to you just really quickly and then give us some application, because I want you guys to spend some time just reading through this passage and then thinking about how is this true in your life. So I'll give you the three big ideas really quickly. The first one is that living for the one true king means rejecting false saviors. Living for the one true king means rejecting false saviors. The second one that we see is that when we do reject false saviors, people will reject us. People will reject us. And then the third one is that Jesus is our king, when following him is better to us than life itself. So these things were true in the boys' lives. They have a literal idol, a statue set in front of them that they are being commanded to worship, but they reject it. And in our lives, most of the time, we're not threatened with a statue or an image, a sculpture that we're being told to worship, but there are things that are false saviors in our lives. And so a question for you to wrestle with is, what is that for you? What is that in your life? For some people, that might be certain friendships or popularity. For some people, it's our country or their status in life, how much money they have. Maybe for you, it is security or comfort or authority over others. But there is something in your life that tempts you to bow down to it. Not literally maybe, but emotionally, to submit your life to it, to think about it, to give it your time and attention, to worship it, to love it. And if it's not Jesus, it is a false savior. And so to live for Jesus means that we reject those things. And when we do this, we know that people will reject us. The boys were faced with a choice: worship this or die. And their response is a great model for us. We see it in chapter 3, verse 17. They basically say, my God is able. My God is able. He will deliver us from your hand, O king. But then in verse 18, they say, but even if he doesn't, we will not disobey him. He is able, but even if he doesn't save us, he's worth it. We will not disobey him. We will not worship your gods or the idol that you have set up. They believed in God's power and his ability to rescue them from their situation. And yet at the same time, they knew that he is worthy of our worship, whether we live or whether we die. And so because Jesus is our king, when following him is better than life itself, the boys knew that they would lose their lives, and they resolved that obedience was better. Is following Jesus better to you than your life, than your very life, everything you have, the breath in your lungs? Is that true of you? And as Daniel 3 concludes, we see that the boys are thrown into the fiery furnace. In fact, the king is so mad at them that he orders the furnace be heated 7 times hotter than normal. And when the soldiers go to open the door to throw the boys in, it is so hot that the soldiers die immediately because of the heat coming out of it. The boys fall in, and then the king sees not 3, but 4 men, unbound, walking around in the midst of the fire. And in that moment, he knows. He calls out to them. He says, servants of the Most High God, come out and come here. And they walk out of the fire. They don't smell like fire. Their clothes aren't burned. Not even a single hair on their head is singed. And then Nebuchadnezzar says in verse 28, he answers and says, blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and delivered his servants, who trusted in him and set aside the king's command and yielded up their bodies rather than serve and worship any god except their own God. Would you yield up your body rather than serve and worship any god except our God? He praises the Lord, Nebuchadnezzar does, in that moment, who is worthy of worship in life and death. And so for you, do you live for the one true king? What are those things, those false saviors that are tempting you to be distracted from your worship of God? And how can you reject them, put them off this week? What are the things that stand in your way of doing that? And my prayer for you this week, as you study through this, as you go through the workout, has some really good questions that will help you think through this. My prayer for you is that as you study it, the Lord would help you to not fear rejection, to help you stand faithfully for Jesus in everything, every aspect of your life, even the small things. Because as disciples of the King, we live for the one true King and for him alone. And on that note, I love you guys, and I hope you have a great week.